For decades, humanity stared at a lie. It was not a malicious deception, but a limitation of our own vision. If you opened any astronomy textbook printed before the year 2015, you would see it. A blurry, pixelated smudge at the very edge of our maps. A grey, lifeless dot that we politely called a planet, and then demoted to a dwarf. We projected our own assumptions onto that low-resolution canvas. We assumed that anything 3 billion miles from the warmth of the Sunday had to be a corpse. We assumed it was a frozen, cratered relic battered by eons of cosmic debris, floating in a state of permanent, unchanging death. We were convinced that the outer solar system was a graveyard where geology went to die. We were wrong. In one single day, that image, the one that had defined our understanding of the cosmos for nearly a century, was deleted. It was wiped from existence, replaced by a reality so complex and so terrifyingly active that it broke the models of planetary science. We went to the edge of the known world expecting to find a stone, and instead we found a heartbeat. But to understand the sheer magnitude of this discovery, you have to understand the impossible journey it took to get there. This was not a simple trip to the moon or a rover landing on Mars. This was a sniper shot into the dark. The target was smaller than our own moon, moving through the twilight of the Kuiper Belt, and we were trying to hit it with a machine the size of a grand piano after a voyage lasting nearly 10 years. The spacecraft, New Horizons, was built for speed, not for stopping. It launched in January of 2006, tearing away from Earth, faster than any object we had ever built. It moved with such ferocity that it crossed the orbit of the moon in just 9 hours, a trip that took the Apollo astronauts 3 days. It was a bullet fired into the void. By the time it passed Jupiter in 2007, stealing a bit of the giant planet's gravity to boost its speed to over 30,000 miles per HR, it was already a legend. But then it did something unsettling. It went to sleep to survive the long, cold traverse across the abyss. The engineers put the spacecraft into hibernation. For years it drifted in silence, spinning slowly to stabilize itself, a tiny speck of metal and ambition lost in the overwhelming blackness between the stars. Once a week, it would wake up just long enough to send a simple tone back to Earth, a faint electronic heartbeat that said, "I am still here. I am still flying," and then silence again. Imagine the isolation. 3 billion miles from home. The Sunday, from that distance, is not a burning orb, but just an intensely bright star, providing no warmth, only a cold, indifferent light. The signals from Earth, travelling at the speed of light, took over 4 hours to reach the craft, and another 4 hours to return. If something went wrong, if the computer crashed, if a micrometeoroid the size of a grain of sand struck the hull at that velocity, the mission would be over before the team on Earth even knew it had happened. The spacecraft was entirely on its own. Then came the summer of 2015, the wake-up call. As New Horizons began its final approach, the blurry smudge that we had stared at for 85 years began to resolve. It shifted from a point of light to a disk, and then slowly, agonizingly, into a world. But it was the last 24 hours that changed everything. The spacecraft was moving so fast that it could not enter orbit. It had to fly by, a one-shot opportunity to capture everything it could before sailing off into the dark forever. The cameras, the spectrometers, the dust counters, every instrument was pre-programmed to execute a precise ballet of observation. The spacecraft had to turn, scan and record without any input from Earth because the time delay made real-time control impossible. On that day in July, the team at the Applied Physics Laboratory waited. They knew the sequence had finished, but they had to wait for the signal to cross the billions of miles of empty space. The tension was suffocating. Had it survived, had the radiation fried the circuits? Had it hit a ring of dust we didn't know existed? And then the signal arrived. a simple stream of data that confirmed the spacecraft was healthy, and its hard drives were full. When the first images finally downloaded, pixel by excruciating pixel, the control room and the world fell into a state of shock. The face of Pluto was not the grey, cratered wasteland we had predicted. It was alive. The first thing that captured the imagination of the entire planet was a vast, bright feature dominating the equator. A perfect, undeniable heart. It was a geological signature so distinct that it felt almost artificial, a greeting card sent from the edge of the solar system. This region, quickly named Tombor Regio in honor of the man who discovered Pluto, was the first clue that this world was defying the laws of physics as we understood them. The left lobe of this heart, a region known as Sputnik Planitia, is a massive plain stretching more than 600 miles across. From a distance, it looks like a smooth white ocean, but as the high-resolution images came into focus, the smoothness itself became the mystery. In the chaotic shooting gallery of the Kuiper Belt, objects are constantly bombarded by debris. A surface that old should be pockmarked with thousands of craters, scarred by billions of years of cosmic violence. But Sputnik Planitia was spotless. It was pristine. There were no craters. Not a single one. This could only mean one thing. The surface was young. In geological terms, young usually means a few million years, but on Pluto it implied something active was resurfacing the planet. Something was erasing the scars of history. The white material filling this basin was not water ice. It was nitrogen ice, mixed with carbon monoxide and methane. And it wasn't just sitting there, it was churning. But before we could even process the mechanics of that impossible ocean, the cameras panned to the edge of the plain, and the landscape shifted from smooth to jagged. Towering over the nitrogen ice floes were mountains, real jagged, formidable mountains, rising 11,000 feet into the black sky. These were not hills or dunes. They rivaled the Rocky Mountains of North America. But here is the terrifying twist. At -375 degrees Fahrenheit, nitrogen and methane are soft, almost slushy. They cannot support mountains of that height. They would collapse under their own weight. So, what were these titans made of? The data confirmed it was water ice. At these temperatures, water ice behaves exactly like granite rock on Earth. It is hard, brittle, and unyielding. These peaks, named Hillary Montes and Tenzing Montes, were giant blocks of bedrock crust, broken and jumbled, floating on top of the softer, denser nitrogen ice below. It was a landscape of chaotic grandeur. Imagine standing on the surface of Sputnik Planitia. The ground beneath your boots is a blindingly white, flat expanse of frozen nitrogen, stretching to the horizon. To your west, jagged, chaotic mountains of grey water ice tear into the starry sky, their peaks catching the weak sunlight. There is no wind in the way we know it, yet there is an atmosphere, a thin blue haze that clings to the surface, layering the horizon in a ghostly twilight. The sheer diversity packed into this tiny world, barely 18% the width of Earth, was overwhelming. We saw vast networks of canyons and troughs, some stretching for hundreds of miles, ripping the crust apart. We saw regions that looked like snakeskin, strange ridges that had no earthly comparison. We saw valleys that looked like they had been carved by flowing rivers. But rivers of what? On a world where oxygen and hydrogen are frozen solid, the fluids flowing across the surface were exotic, toxic mixtures of neon-cold elements. But the most haunting realization came when we looked closer at the heart. The smooth plains of Sputnik Planitia were not just flat, they were patterned. The surface was divided into polygonal shapes, giant cells roughly 10 to 30 miles wide. They looked like the skin of a reptile or the cracking mud of a dried lake bed. But on a colossal scale. These were not cracks caused by cooling. They were evidence of motion. The nitrogen ice was boiling. Not boiling with heat as we know it, but convection. The faint, persistent warmth from Pluto's deep interior was heating the bottom of this nitrogen glacier, causing warm blobs of ice to rise to the center of these cells, while cooler ice sank at the edges. This was a heartbeat, a slow, churning geological rhythm that turned the surface over every million years or so. Pluto was effectively resurfacing itself, wiping away the craters, resetting the clock. It was a planetary reset button that had been stuck in the on position for billions of years. The realization sent shivers through the scientific community. For a world this small to retain enough heat to drive such massive geological engines should be impossible. Mars, which is much larger and closer to the Sun, is geologically dead. The Moon is dead. Mercury is dead. Yet here, in the freezing dark, Pluto was churning, flowing, and evolving. The image of the dead rock was gone. In its place was a world with glaciers that creep from the highlands into the valleys, behaving exactly like ice flows on Earth, but made of entirely different chemicals. We saw evidence of winds, despite the atmosphere being 10,000 times thinner than Earth's. We saw dark streaks that hinted at particulate transport. Dunes made of methane sand blowing across a landscape of water, ice bedrock, and the colors we expected grey. We found a kaleidoscope of subtle, dangerous hues. The reddish-browns of the darker regions, the blinding whites of the nitrogen plains, the deep blues of the atmosphere seen in silhouette. These colors were not just aesthetic, they were chemical signatures. The red came from toluenes, complex organic molecules cooked up by ultraviolet sunlight breaking down methane in the upper atmosphere, raining down like a slow cosmic soot over billions of years. It was a world coated in the building blocks of life, frozen in a state of suspended animation. New Horizons had traveled 3 billion miles to answer a simple question: what does Pluto look like? The answer it returned was a puzzle that would take decades to solve. The deletion of the old Pluto was complete. The new Pluto was a place of mystery, a dynamic engine of ice and heat that defied the thermal limits of our solar system. We had opened a door to the Kuiper Belt, and the first thing we saw was a world that refused to die. But as the scientists stared at those convection cells on Sputnik Planitia, a deeper, more unsettling question began to form. If the surface is moving, if the heat is rising, what is happening beneath the ice? The implications were staggering. The geology suggested that the crust was detached, free-floating, and if the crust is floating, it must be floating on something fluid. The data began to point toward a conclusion that no one wanted to say out loud because it sounded like madness. Beneath that frozen, radiation-bathed shell, beneath the nitrogen glaciers and the water ice mountains, Pluto might be hiding a secret that changes the definition of habitable. We thought the surface was the shock. We were wrong. The real monster was hiding in the dark, miles below our feet. Are you ready to dive under the ice? It is a chilling thought that the most active geology in the solar system might be happening in the dark. When we look at the heart of Pluto, that vast, white expanse of Sputnik Planitia, we are not looking at solid ground. We are looking at a skin, and like any skin, it is hiding the anatomy beneath it. The polygonal cells that cover the region, those 20-mile-wide shapes that look like the tiling of a great cathedral floor, are merely the surface tension of a much deeper, slower, and more terrifying process. Underneath those sheets of nitrogen ice, there is motion. The heat from Pluto's radioactive core, trapped for billions of years, is trying to escape. It pushes upward, warming the bottom of the nitrogen glacier, causing it to rise in great sluggish plumes. These plumes reach the surface, spread out, cool down in the vacuum of space, and then sink back into the depths at the edges of the cells. It is a convection cycle, exactly like a pot of oatmeal boiling on a stove, but played out in extreme slow motion over hundreds of thousands of years. This means that the surface of Sputnik Planitia is constantly refreshing itself. If you were to stand there for 1 million years, you would see the ground beneath your feet turn over, burying any crater, any dust, any history. and replacing it with fresh white ice from the deep. But this churning engine requires a fuel source, and it requires a medium. The sheer weight of this glacier is immense. Sputnik Planitia is not just a thin layer of frost, it is a basin, likely formed by a catastrophic impact early in Pluto's history, now filled with miles of heavy nitrogen ice. This concentrated mass is so heavy that it may have actually tipped the entire planet over, reorienting Pluto so that the heart always faces away from its moon, Charon. But the real secret lies in what keeps the engine running. Models derived from the New Horizons data suggest that beneath the frozen crust of water ice, there is a layer that should not exist, a global ocean. Not an ocean of magma, but an ocean of water. At a distance where the sun is just a bright star and surface temperatures hover near absolute zero, water should be as hard as granite. It should be stone. Yet, the data indicates that a layer of liquid water, likely mixed with ammonia and other antifreeze compounds, persists between the rocky core and the icy shell. This ocean would not be like the seas of Earth. It would be pitch black, crushed under immense pressure and toxic with ammonia. But it is liquid, and where there is liquid water and energy, there is the potential for chemistry. For decades, we believed the habitable zone of a star was a narrow ring of warmth where liquid water could exist on the surface. Pluto shattered that definition. It proved that you don't need a sun to have an ocean. You just need enough ice to insulate it and enough radioactive heat to keep it from freezing. It forces us to ask a disturbing question. If a dwarf planet at the edge of the system can harbour an ocean, how many other dark, frozen worlds are hiding liquid water in the deep? The surprises did not end with the geology. When New Horizons spun around to look back at Pluto, capturing its silhouette against the distant Sunday, it revealed a ghost. A glowing blue halo ringed the night side of the world. It was a stunningly beautiful image, but scientifically, it was baffling. We knew Pluto had a thin atmosphere, but we expected it to be a simple, hazy grey. Instead, we saw a complex layered sky of distinct blue. This colour comes from a process similar to the one that creates smog on Earth, but driven by the weak, distant sunlight. Ultraviolet photons strike methane molecules high in the atmosphere, breaking them apart. These fragments drift downward, reacting with one another to form larger, more complex hydrocarbons. As they grow heavier, they settle out of the atmosphere like a fine, cosmic snow. These particles, called tholins, are what give the surface of Pluto its deep, blood-red patches. We are seeing a world where the sky is blue, but the snow is red, and this atmosphere is not stable. It is a dying thing. Pluto has a highly elliptical orbit, swinging closer to the Sunday, and then retreating far into the dark. We caught it at a rare moment of maximum atmosphere. As Pluto moves away from the Sunday in its 248-year orbit, the temperatures will drop. The gas that currently makes up that beautiful blue halo will freeze. It will turn into frost and fall out of the sky. The atmosphere will literally collapse onto the surface, leaving the world airless and silent for a century until it swings back toward the warmth and the cycle begins again. We arrived at the exact perfect moment to see it breathe before it holds its breath for the long winter. But Pluto is not dancing alone in the dark. To understand the violence of this system, we have to look at its partner, Charon. Charon is not just a moon. In many ways, Pluto and Charon are a double planet system. Charon is so massive, half the size of Pluto, that the two orbit a point in empty space between them. They are locked in a gravitational embrace, always showing the same face to one another. If you stood on the side of Pluto facing Charon, the moon would hang motionless in the sky, a giant grey sentinel that never sets and never rises. New Horizons revealed Charon to be a world of stark, brutal contrasts. While Pluto is painted in reds and whites and creams, Charon is mostly the colour of old concrete. But there is a stain. At its north pole, there is a dark reddish cap that looks like a wound. Astronomers have informally named it Mordor Macula. The origin of this stain is a tale of cosmic theft. The gravity of Charon is capturing the atmosphere, escaping from Pluto. As nitrogen and methane leak away from Pluto, some of it drifts across the gap and lands on Charon's pole. There, in the permanent winter shadow, it freezes solid. Over millions of years, radiation cooks this stolen atmosphere into tholins, staining the pole red. Charon is literally wearing the atmosphere of its partner, but the most terrifying feature on Charon is not its colour, it is its scar. Stretching across the moon's equator is a canyon system that defies logic. It is called Serenity Chasma, a name that belies its violence. This canyon is 4 times longer and twice as deep as the Grand Canyon on Earth. It looks as if the moon was attacked by a giant claw. The leading theory for this scar is a story of a frozen apocalypse. Billions of years ago, Charon too may have had a subsurface ocean, but Charon is smaller than Pluto, and it cooled faster. As the internal ocean began to freeze, it expanded. Water is one of the few substances that takes up more space as a solid than as a liquid. As the interior turned to ice, the pressure grew. The outer crust could not contain the swelling volume inside. The entire moon literally burst at the seams. The crust ripped open, creating this jagged, 1,000-mile-long fracture. It is a fossilized scream, a permanent record of the moment a world froze to death. While Pluto managed to keep its heart beating, Charon died. It is a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when the heat runs out. Yet, even on Pluto, the violence is not always subtle. Beyond the nitrogen plains, New Horizons spotted features that look like volcanoes. But these are not the cinder cones of Earth. Specifically, a feature named Right Mons stands nearly as tall as Mauna Loa in Hawaii. It has a central depression, a caldera, just like a terrestrial volcano, but lava cannot exist here. Instead, this is a cryovolcano. Imagine an eruption at absolute zero. The magma is not molten rock. It is a slushy slurry of water, ice, ammonia, and methanol. When the pressure builds, it doesn't explode in fire. It oozes out in a slow, viscous flow, resurfacing the land with fresh ice. The existence of such massive cryovolcanoes implies that Pluto has been retaining heat far longer than anyone predicted. It suggests that the dead zone of the solar system is actually a place of hidden fires, burning chemically in the dark. We found valleys that looked like they were carved by flowing liquids. We found dunes that look like they were shaped by wind. We found a world that mimics the geology of Earth, but builds it out of materials that would kill us instantly. Pluto is a funhouse mirror reflection of our own planet, familiar yet deeply alien. By the time New Horizons finished its scan, the data stream was overwhelmed. We had gone looking for a relic and found a living world, but the mission was not designed to stop. The spacecraft was hurtling through the system at 32,000 miles per hour, powered by the decay of plutonium in its nuclear generator. It could not slow down. It could only look back. As Pluto receded into the distance, turning back into a star-like point of light, the team on Earth was already looking ahead. The Kuiper Belt is vast, a donut-shaped ring of debris stretching for billions of miles. Pluto was the king of the Kuiper Belt, but to truly understand the origins of our solar system, we needed to see the peasants. We needed to see the building blocks. We needed to find a target that had not been melted, resurfaced, or altered by internal heat. We needed a fossil. The search for the next target was desperate. The Hubble Space Telescope was pushed to its limit, staring into the star fields ahead of the spacecraft's trajectory. And then they found it. A faint, magnitude 27 speck of light. It was 1 billion miles past Pluto. It was small, cold, and utterly unknown. It had no name, only a designation 2014 UNU 69. Later, it would be called Arrokoth. It was the most distant object ever targeted for a flyby. If Pluto was the shock of the new, Arrokoth promised to be the ghost of the past. It was a time capsule sealed 4.5 billion years ago, waiting in the deep freeze for someone to come and open it. New Horizons adjusted its course. The engines fired. The spacecraft turned its back on the complex, beautiful, terrifying world of Pluto and faced the void once more. It was diving deeper into the abyss, towards a relic from the dawn of time. We thought we knew what a primitive world looked like. We expected a lump of rock. We were wrong again. The universe has a twisted sense of humour. We spent nearly a decade hurling a machine across the void, chasing a target we couldn't even see, expecting to find chaos. We travelled 4 billion miles to witness a scene of violence, a remnant of the brutal collisions that we believed forged the solar system. We expected a graveyard of shattered rocks, a debris field left over from a cosmic demolition derby. What we found instead was a snowman, and it was sleeping. When the first resolved image of Arrokoth arrived on Earth on January 1st, 2019, the control room at Johns Hopkins University didn't erupt in immediate cheers. There was a collective, audible gasp of confusion. The object on the screens defied the aggressive physics we had taught for 50 years. It wasn't a jagged fragment. It wasn't a cratered lump. It was two perfect, distinct worlds, gently resting against each other. This object, officially designated 2014 Mu-69 and later named Arrokoth, is a contact binary. But that scientific term fails to capture the sheer improbability of what New Horizons saw. The two lobes, the larger one nicknamed Ultima and the smaller Thule, are fused together at a narrow, bright neck. But they are not crushed. There are no stress fractures. There is no shatter cone. The geometry of their connection implies that these two bodies didn't crash into each other, they kissed. Think about the precision required for that. In the vast, empty darkness of the Kuiper Belt, two independent objects, drifting for millions of years, found each other. They spiraled inward, caught in a delicate gravitational dance, bleeding off their momentum until they touched at a speed no faster than a human walking pace. It was a gentle freezing embrace that has lasted for 4.5 billion years. This single observation killed the violent theories of planetary formation instantly. It proved that the birth of our solar system wasn't a war. In the beginning, it was a quiet, orderly accumulation of matter in the dark. But as the scientists peeled back the layers of this distant onion, the cute snowman shape revealed something far more alien. When the spacecraft sent back the side profile data weeks later, the 3D model collapsed. Arrokoth isn't two spheres like snowballs. It is flattened. The large lobe is shaped like a giant pancake, and the small lobe is like a dented walnut. We have never seen anything like this in nature. How do you form a flat world? The physics required to create such a shape suggests that Arrokoth formed from a thin, collapsing disk of pebbles, a cloud of dust that gently settled into this singular, impossible form. And then there is the face of the world itself. If Pluto was a shock because it was too active, Arrokoth is terrifying because it is too still. The surface is hauntingly smooth. On a body that has been exposed to the shooting gallery of the Kuiper Belt for billions of years, we expected to see it riddled with craters. We expected scars. But Arrokoth is almost pristine. There are pits, yes, but they aren't impact craters. They are likely collapse features, places where the ancient material gave way as volatile gases sublimated into space eons ago. This smoothness tells us that Arrokoth is a cold classical object. It is a member of an elite reclusive family of rocks that have never, ever been disturbed. It has never been heated by the Sunday. It has never been pushed around by Neptune's gravity. It has never collided with another massive body. It is a ghost. It is sitting in the exact same orbit with the exact same spin holding the exact same chemistry as it did the day the Sunday ignited. To look at Arrokoth is to look at a photograph taken 4.5 billion years ago, developed in a darkroom of absolute zero and hidden in a drawer until now. The colour of this fossil is equally telling. It is not the grey of our moon. It is a deep, visceral red. This is the colour of time. Just like on Pluto and Charon, this redness comes from Tholin's complex organic compounds, synthesized by the slow bombardment of cosmic rays and faint ultraviolet light on methane and methanol ices. But on Arrokoth, this layer is ancient. It is the original paint job of the solar system. Methanol, a simple alcohol, is frozen onto its surface. If you could stand there, which you couldn't, because the gravity is so weak you could jump into orbit with a slight hop, you would be standing on a world made of frozen alcohol and red organic dust, staring into a sky where the Sunday is just a piercingly bright pinprick, indistinguishable from other stars to the naked eye. The silence of Arrokoth is its loudest feature. It implies that the outer solar system is not a chaotic blender, but a deep freeze. It is a museum, and New Horizons was the first visitor to walk through the halls. But the mission didn't stop at the museum. The flyby of Arrokoth was a blink, and you miss it encounter. The spacecraft was moving at 32,000 miles per H-hour, covering 7 miles every single second. As it slewed its cameras around to catch the crescent of Arrokoth receding into the darkness, it was already saying goodbye. The snowman faded back into a point of light, and then back into invisibility. Now, the spacecraft is alone again. New Horizons is currently sailing through the Kuiper Cliff, a region where the density of icy rocks drops off mysteriously. It is heading toward the exit. Its nuclear heart, a generator powered by decaying plutonium dioxide, is slowly cooling. Its power output is dropping by a few watts every year. Eventually, somewhere around the mid-2030s, the power will dip too low to run the transmitter and the heaters simultaneously. The team will have to make choices. They will turn off the cameras, then the dust counters, then the particle detectors. One by one, the senses of the robot will go dark. Finally, the transmitter will be cut to save the last dregs of power for data storage. But with no way to send it home, the machine will become a mute tomb. It will continue to coast, a silent ambassador from Earth, drifting toward the constellation of Sagittarius. It will leave the solar system, cross the heliopause, and enter the true interstellar medium, joining Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 in the endless dark between the stars. But before it goes silent, it is teaching us one final uncomfortable lesson. We used to think the solar system ended at Pluto. Then we thought it ended at the Kuiper Belt. Now, thanks to New Horizons and the Voyagers, we know that the edge is not a line, but a vast, deep forest. And the deeper we look into that forest, the more we realize something is hiding in the trees. The motion of objects like Arrokoth and the strange elongated orbits of other distant bodies we are just starting to discover hint at a presence we haven't seen yet. A gravitational ghost. Mathematical models suggest that something massive, something 5 to 10 times the mass of Earth, might be lurking far beyond the orbit of Pluto, shepherding these icy rocks like a phantom sheepdog. We call it Planet 9. We haven't seen it. We haven't heard it. But the gravity of the outer solar system is pointing to it like a compass needle. Arrokoth showed us that the early solar system was capable of building massive cores gently in the dark. It proved that the raw materials were there. So, if Arrokoth is the brick and Pluto is the house, could there be a castle hiding in the dark? New Horizons has shown us the building blocks. It has shown us the fossils. But as it drifts into the silence, it leaves us with a question that is far more terrifying than any answer it provided. We have mapped the light. We have visited the known worlds. But between the orbit of Arrokoth and the nearest star, there is a gap of 4 light years. That is trillions of miles of absolute darkness. Do you really think it is empty? We assume the solar system fades away into nothingness, but there is a theory that suggests the edge isn't empty, it's occupied. And the reason we haven't found the giants hiding in the Oort cloud is because they are dark, cold, and waiting. If you think the snowman was a surprise, you are not ready for what might be orbiting in the true abyss. There is a reason we are so obsessed with finding Planet 9, and it's not just about completing the map, it's about facing the monster in our own backyard. I've explored the evidence for this hidden giant in this video right here. Click to see why the solar system might have one more terrifying secret left to tell. Until next time, keep looking up.